My countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart.
Amen. Okay, Daniel 7. Anything that stands out at first glance you particularly enjoyed? I mean, we've all been through the chapter before, but...
Why is there 4 beasts instead of 1?
Why is there 4 instead of 1?
Yeah. And why is the horn with eyes in the mouth? That's what I don't get.
Okay, we're going to have to figure that out, right? There's some beasts with apparently human elements to it, right? Hi, Pam. How you doing?
Characteristics.
And what?
And other animals' characteristics.
Mm-hmm. Right, so clearly... Hey, Rosemary, how you doing?
Hi, good to see you, Rosemary.
We missed you.
I've been sick for over a month.
Oh no.
Oh, wow.
You were missed.
Horrible. How you
Thank
feel?
you.
So much sickness.
Well, you look good.
Rosemary, why don't you sit there? You have a little hearing problem.
Okay.
My sister and hearing.
Right, so we just started Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. We literally just read through it. So Rachel kind of brings out an interesting point, because now we're shifting in the book of Daniel, right? What's the shift? What is the difference between Daniel chapters 1 through 6 and Daniel 7 and onwards?
Now, Daniel's getting a dream.
That he doesn't understand.
Okay, first and foremost, yeah, that's Daniel is getting a dream and he doesn't understand it, right? It's even more of a problem later on, right? In some of the later visions. Yeah, and some of them, it's so overwhelming that what actually happens to him? Yeah, he passes out on his face. It takes the angel Gabriel actually, right, to come up and make him right. What else?
Daniel goes into, well, out of 4 beasts, the 4th one is the most terrible. And he describes coming to be known as the Roman Catholic Church as far as the little horn.
So he sees a lot of things that concern both the past and also the very future, right? The very end of time. What else? What else is there when it comes to a difference between the first 6 chapters and chapter, for example, 7, 8, and 9?
Chapter 7, future.
What we saw, we'll study that the first beast represents a particular kingdom, right? That kingdom is already in the past. So we'll see that some of chapter 7 is already in the past, some of it is in the present, and some of it is still in the future, right? But the first 6 chapters of Daniel, we know that Daniel was he involved directly in those chapters?
No. Indirect. Well, yes and no.
Yes, directly for the most part. Some parts he was in
character first.
But he was in the main spotlight. So both of those things are true, but in chapters 1 through 6,
he's the one who interpreted the dreams and knew the meanings from God, and now he doesn't even know his own vision.
That's true. But the thing is, do the first 6 chapters literally happen?
Yeah.
They actually physically literally take place?
Yes.
Yes, they do. Chapter 1, does Babylon literally overtake the world?
Yes.
Yes. Is there an actual image of gold set up in Daniel 3?
Yes.
And so on and so forth. So it's actual events, historical accounts. Now we're moving on to chapters that are strictly prophetic.
What does that
First
mean?
and foremost, where the focus is specific symbolism within prophecy.
Okay.
Whereas chapters 1 through 6, you had a series of events that happened in the life of Daniel or of his friends, and that series of events, in principle, represented something else that's going to happen in the future. What we're going to do now with chapters 7 and 8 and onwards is these chapters are purely prophetic, which means that God gives Daniel the vision. Daniel simply tells us what the vision was about. Okay, 4 beasts. This happens with the beasts. But these visions are not literal, meaning Daniel doesn't actually see a time when there is a lion-looking beast, literal beast with 2 wings coming out, then a bear beast, then a leopard, then a dragon. There's no actual literal beast coming out on the earth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that make sense, guys? Simple difference. But, again, it's something very important. Anything else that stands out in Daniel 7? We're shifting from the historical to the symbolic. Which, again, tells you that the events of Daniel chapter 7, again, those beasts have to be at least symbolic nature, right? Figurative nature, much of which may be still future. Anything else? Daniel 7?
The Ancient of Days.
Right, this vision itself seems to be split up into two, right?
Yeah.
What's the two elements to it? Because there are two elements to this prophecy. Take a look at the geography of where the events are playing out in Daniel 7.
In heavenly.
Right. Yeah, there's a look at verses 1 through 8. When Daniel is beholding these beasts in the vision, he sees them as taking place or arising on the scene upon the earth. Right. Then when it switches to the scene of a heavenly judgment throne type of scene in heaven, from verses, for example, 9 through 14, we see that that is actually taking place in heaven. Then it jumps back to those beasts on earth. So we're going to have to break that down, the difference for the two visions within Daniel 7, the one that is earthly and the one that is heavenly. Anything else? Just to get it out of the way, we know that Daniel 7, the earthly and even the heavenly part of the vision, they both extend to which point in time? I'm sorry, Rich?
The very end.
Yeah, to the very end, to the very second coming of Christ. Yes, Rachel?
I found out that because my Bible gives the verses by it, and if you look in Revelation 19 verse 20, it also talks about the beasts and the animals.
Yes. Well, you can read that. Can you read that for us? What was it? Did you say Revelation 19:20?
Yeah.
Go ahead, you can read it.
And the beast was taken and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped him his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire burning with brimstone.
Okay, so it's talking about some kind of a beast in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's do we see beast in the book of Revelation?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess the question will be: is the beast that is being spoken of in Revelation 19 the same as one of the beasts, at least in Daniel chapter 7? So,
Probably.
yeah, we're gonna have to figure that out once we get there. So that's something to keep in mind, right, Rach?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Daniel 7 before we go on.
Mm.
How much of this do you think Daniel was detailed?
How much detail did he understand, do you think?
Or did he see? You know, was he seeing the strife of humanity, the death of humanity? You know, when it said these beasts would trample down the saints and overcome, and I mean, do you think he saw glimpses of that stuff?
That's a good question. Or what was the nature of the vision itself? Because I've wondered about that sometimes. You know, does at certain times a prophet see in vision the events literally taking place and then he is inspired to use symbols? Or does he actually see the events taking place in symbolic fashion? Like, for example, in John, when he saw the actual horsemen and chariots riding. And he understands that what he is seeing is symbolic, whereas they may see an actual event. You know, let's say they see World War II in vision. They see the literal event, and then they are inspired by the Holy Spirit to write it down in symbolic using symbols. You understand what I'm saying? I've wondered about that too. I think it happens both at different times, but it's something to ponder.
There's got to be tremendous. You'd be taken into the future and see what befalls mankind.
Right. Well,
I was saying, like you said, if you take it into the future, and yeah, I think back then with Daniel, they didn't have automobiles then.
Mm-hmm.
And then they take it into the future. Did they actually see automobiles or see planes and helicopters, or is that not involved?
I guess that's a question you're gonna have to ask him when we get up there.
Well, this all parallels two,
Mm.
right? It's
Yeah.
the parallel of two.
Yeah, I'm sure some of them saw, some of this technology in the future, and probably were perplexed a little bit. I mean, Daniel saw plenty of visions concerning the end of time. I'm sure perhaps one of the reasons why he was so, it boggled his mind is because he saw things that he couldn't
I had
even,
no idea.
yeah, couldn't even come up with to what this thing does. So that's. But to me, I've always understood that, it doesn't matter how much a prophet is shown in vision or in a dream. Because, you think about how do they remember all this stuff, all the detail and everything. But I believe if God gives you a dream or a vision, if it's his desire for it to be penned down and spread, then he's going to help you remember every single little tiny detail.
Daniel probably had a scribe with him.
May have, especially given his position.
Such powerful man.
Rachel?
I have a quick question here. Daniel 7 verse 15. I kind of don't understand that verse a little bit.
Okay, Daniel 7 and verse 15. Can you read it for us, please?
Okay. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the vision of my head troubled me.
Can anyone help Rachel out in verse 15?
He's saddened, I would think.
Why would he be sad after seeing that?
Yeah, that should be it right there.
Well, why would he be sad? Think about it. Think about it logically. Imagine that you, Rachel, you just slept the previous night, and in the middle of the night, God gives you this most amazing dream, this most amazing vision. It is so vivid, shows you all these things that happen in history are happening right now and in the future and everything, and you know that it is of an amazing nature. You know that it is from the Lord. But when you wake up, you can't understand any of it. You may remember portions of it, but you can't understand any of it. You have no idea, no clue what this is about. Would you be a little bit
Upset?
unhappy? Yes.
Yeah, probably.
Right, because you naturally want to understand the dream, right?
Yeah, I get what you mean now.
Yeah, so one of the reasons is simply because he doesn't fully understand it. At the same time, you can think that the events that are being portrayed are so fascinating that, he was just stirred in his spirit. Literally, it shook him what he saw, events of such importance. If that makes sense.
Kind of.
Anyone else? Verse 15.
I think that's maybe Daniel saw into the future. The cars and everything, he didn't understand.
You could have seen that too.
Yeah,
I take it on the other way. I take that what he saw was,
mind-boggling?
I'm going to say, very negative.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there was there's an outcome that is good, the majority of it is very sobering.
Yeah.
When you see the amount of destruction and deception and death, has to be very, very troubling.
Right. Although Daniel has been walking with the Lord for many years, so
Yeah,
he does have a
but
level
I mean, if you see many that aren't, it's got to trouble you.
He's the only one.
Because I believe he had great compassion for people.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. And especially, I guess, when you read about this power that is persecuting and wearing out the saints of the Most High and persecuting God's people, it will make your heart go after God's people because you do genuinely love them. You don't want to see them suffer.
Yeah, remember that was during the Reformation too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he saw all of that. He saw the times of the Reformation, everything.
And he was seeing, and yet he was knowing some things that he's seen, like he says about the time. He's seen a season and a time. On 12. And how do you see the dominion? If he's seen the vision and he's seen the time prolonged for a season and a time. I think that's interesting.
I guess not all of the vision is always written down.
Maybe information was coming into him and the vision.
Well, verse 12 has got to deal with where doubt as far as I'm concerned.
Well, we'll touch upon that, Dave. Bring that up when we deal with the heavenly aspect of the vision, of the judgment scene itself. I think there's a good reason for that. Okay, anything else in chapter 7?
So the Ancient of Days.
Okay.
You notice how they don't say Ancient of Years? Ancient of Days.
Well, I guess these may be prophetic years, right?
Ancient of Days. 7 days?
Every day.
You guys remember the type and anti-type from last week? Of Daniel 6,
Yeah.
Daniel in the lion's den? The one anti-type, what was it about? Do you remember? The whole experience of Daniel going through the lion's den was a type of who performing a specific work. It was a type of none other than
Peace.
was Jesus Christ, right? Who has a loving relationship with a king over the entire universe, a king who cannot change or alter his law, his word. We have the man of God, who in the type is Daniel, and the anti-type is Jesus Christ, who is the blameless one, the one that is innocent, who has that loving relationship with the Father. We saw that in the type. Remember, it was who influenced the state, the civil power to condemn?
Spiritual.
It was the spiritual leaders, right, with Daniel. The soothsayers, the psychics, all those guys. And the anti-type was also the spiritual leaders, right, it was the Sanhedrin. So we went through the whole type and anti-type, how in the parallel, the whole story of Daniel chapter 6 is a beautiful delineation of what Jesus was going to do within the plan of redemption. How the one who was innocent and blameless was going to die. And as a result of this, it creates a favorable impression which upon the mind of the king, which then allows the captives to go free by the decree. That's from that handout that I gave you guys. Oops. Right. Now, really quick. Remember how I mentioned before, and we briefly mentioned how going through Daniel 1 through 6, the first chapters, tells us a beautiful story if you look at it from the perspective of types and anti-types. If you look at the stories not just as historical accounts, but as prophecies, it delineates to us much more about the battle between good and evil, right? So remember, Daniel 1, what was it about? What was the warning that was contained in there?
Worship and appetite.
Okay, and before there is an issue of appetite mentioned, a king does something, right?
Enslaves.
Right, that was the king of...
Babylon.
Okay, so Babylon over what? Overwhelms the world. And at the same time, when he overwhelms the world, there is a conflict, right? Or a test for who?
Then
For all Israel people.
God's people.
Mm-hmm. There's too much surface here. So Daniel chapter 1, Babylon overwhelms the world, and there's a conflict, a test for God's people. And remember how we mentioned that in the Bible, God, his mechanic, literally, hold on, I'm going to need some water. All of a sudden you can't talk. And there's a conflict and test for God's people. And remember we were talking about how in the Bible, God uses his mechanism of his literally structure a little bit differently. He deals from effect to cause, right? Not from cause to effect. So we kind of have to work our way backwards. Babylon overtaking the world and there being a conflict and a test for God's people is the effect, right? This is the effect. I want to just underline this over here. Daniel 1 is the effect. What's the cause for it?
Why did it happen?
Right. What's the cause for the king of Babylon wanting to overtake the entire world?
Wanting to or allowed to?
Wanting to. Why does he try to overtake the world?
It's just what rulers do, ain't it? It's the,
That everybody under him.
what do they call that? Pride makes you want to be a
Part of
god.
Satan's plan.
And this plan is revealed in Daniel chapter.
3.
Before it's seen in 3, it's revealed in Daniel chapter 2. The cause for Daniel chapter 1 is found in Daniel chapter 2. And the cause is that Satan wants to do what?
Set up his kingdom.
Wipe out God's remnant.
Right. First and foremost, he needs to set up his own kingdom. The effect is Babylon overwhelms the world. It is because it is revealed in Daniel 2 that it is because Satan wants to establish his own kingdom of sin and idolatry. And so God gives us a warning in Daniel 1. In Daniel 2, he gives us the why as to that first part revealed in Daniel 1. So you can think about that the warning in Daniel chapter 1 is a dual warning. Look, Babylon is about to overtake the world. And look, because it's about to overtake the world, you need to be ready because there is a test coming, which seemingly seems like a small issue of appetite, seems truly insignificant, but in reality it is a matter of life and death. And again, this happens because Satan is trying to establish his own kingdom of sin and idolatry, and this is revealed through the delineation of kingdoms in Daniel chapter 2. What about the second part of Daniel 1, that there is a conflict or test for God's people?
Yeah, that's what Daniel tells us to let him eat his own food.
Well, where is that revealed specifically? This part about the test for God's people at the end of time. Just go to the next chapter. Daniel chapter
3.
Daniel 3.
It's like a connection.
It is. It's really what it is. It's just the story, but in reverse book mode, you know. So it's kind of like reading the story from the back to the front.
Why?
That's how God does it within the Bible, I guess, to challenge us, perhaps, or to remind us that His ways are not our ways, and vice versa. Okay, so Daniel 3 shows us that there is a test of loyalty / worship. In Daniel chapter 3, we saw that there was a test of loyalty, a test of worship, and this test was brought on about through the powers of church and state being combined and a freedom of conscience being restricted. Men were compelled to worship God a certain type of way in a particular point in time. And that's what is revealed in Daniel 3.
I just realized something, that Babylon is closer to closer to Egypt. I thought it was further away.
No, well, it had control over much of the world.
True.
So much of what was Egypt at the time of Nebuchadnezzar was actually also Babylon at the time.
Oh.
Okay, so Daniel 1, Daniel 2, and Daniel 3. You with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay, so Daniel 2 and Daniel 3 are the cause for the warning of Daniel 1. Remember, all of this looking at it from the perspective of antitype, type and antitype. So what about Daniel 4? Because Daniel 4, what was it a prophecy about?
Is that the collapse of Babylon?
It was, you're thinking more, I think, Daniel 5, that the actual collapse, the destruction of Babylon, that's Daniel 5, with Belshazzar. Daniel 4 is the prophecy about the king of Babylon, right? It's the judgment about the king of Babylon, which in the parallel, at the end of time, what did it represent? Satan, him establishing himself as that great tree, right, to cover the world, this tree which was good and turned bad. And then we saw that there's a depiction. There are two main points to the story of Daniel 4. First, the tree is cut down. And then the second part of the story, we said that there is a judgment that is pronounced upon the king of Babylon for how long?
7 years.
For 7 years, right? Which tells us that the lake of fire will last for 7 years, prior to which Satan, as this great tree, this great kingdom, is cut down. So how do we tie this in to what we just saw in Daniel 1, 2, and 3? But look, Satan is going to make one last dash attack. It's about to happen. He's about to overtake the world. God's people are about to be thrown into a period of test and trial. He is doing this because he's trying to establish his own kingdom of idolatry and sin. And he will, when he does this, he will restrict freedom of conscience, which will bring his people into a test. And I like to think that Daniel, yes, Willie?
I know you're talking about God's people,
Mm-hmm.
but it seems like only Daniel or him and three partners are the only ones being tested.
All right, so what does that tell you about the end of time?
Limited people.
Small group.
Yeah. How many people will
That's
want
why
to
I
be?
think if you go back there, if Satan knows the Bible, he's got a real good communication system, and he knows when there's very few that are true followers, and then he seizes the opportunity. That's what I believe.
Especially
He
now.
knows.
Yeah, exactly. He knows exactly
Yeah,
what
because
he needs to do.
144,000.
What about him?
I said there's only 144,000.
Well, 144,000 that will survive through all of this, right?
Yeah.
But many, many more millions that will lay hold of the truth. But again, compared to the overall majority of the billions of people who will go with this false system, the amount of God's people that will step onto the truth side, where it's going to be very infinitesimal. You know, hopefully it won't be millions upon millions, but we'll see. Okay, so what about Daniel 4? How does that fit in here? It kind of makes me think of, if you remember when we were in Daniel before, remember Daniel 11 where it gives us this great delineation of over 40 verses of the battle between the king of the north and the king of the south, and how Satan is trying to move behind the scenes and to influence the kingdoms of the world to try to cause things to happen in the way that he wants them to happen, so he gets a kind of a desired effect from it.
Cause and effect.
And it goes through this delineation of so many verses, one after another. So the king of the north does this, bam, 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 bam. The king of the north does something else in response. And it goes through all of this up until it reaches the end of time. And if you go with me to Daniel chapter 11, and then at the very end of Daniel 11, it starts talking about Lucifer, or Satan, the power that is driving all these evil events. In Daniel 11 and 45.
There.
Daniel 11:45. And after God gives us in that chapter the entire breakdown of what's going to take place with these powers and how Satan's going to work through this, at the very end of it all, there is a proclamation. Okay, so Satan's going to do this and this and this and this and this and this and this through all of these kingdoms, but can someone read verse 45 of Daniel 11?
And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious mountains. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him.
Like, I always love the last part. But he will come to his end, and none shall help him. And that's kind of how I see Daniel chapter 4 jumping in here. That look, Satan is going to make that one last ditch attempt to set up his kingdom. He's about to do this. He is going to do this because he's trying to do this in opposition to myself. And when he does this, it is going to create a series of events for God's people where they will be tested beyond anything they've been tested on before. However, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So then Daniel chapter 4 comes in.
There's only 12 verses in Daniel? 12 chapters.
In the book of Daniel, yeah, but there's a lot in it.
Oh.
So Daniel chapter 4 really is a promise promise that Satan will not what?
When
Right. So look, it's God's giving us a warning. Daniel 1, 2, and 3. Look, it's about to take place. Satan's trying to do this. You're going to be involved in this. His one last ditch attempt, however, my promise to you is that he will not succeed. And that's what Daniel chapter 4 reveals. What's amazing is that Daniel 4 then is again split up into two furthermore. Because first you have the dream of the tree itself. Remember, the first part is Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The dream is about the tree and the cutting down of the tree. And the second part is the judgment being poured out in the experience of Nebuchadnezzar. So I would just say that 7-year judgment executed. Remember, the cutting of the tree for a time represented time when Jesus does what?
Satan is bound to this earth, right?
In which manner?
The key to bottomless pit.
By himself for 1,000 years.
Dave, I'm sorry, what did you say?
That was the key to bottomless pit, that part.
Yeah, but we know that's a symbolic representation, right? That Satan doesn't have the authority and power to exercise over this realm because there's no longer any people alive, right? And we know where you mentioned this, that this happens at the second coming. That this cutting of the tree prophetically represents a time when Satan for a time is unable to exercise his power. He is bound in check with a band of iron and brass, remember, for a time. And then once that 1,000 years is expired, as we read in Revelation 20, then he is loosed out of his prison.
What happens then?
We'll come back to that at another point.
Okay.
Right, so remember, Daniel 4 is a promise that, look, judgment is set against Lucifer. It will take place. It is split up into two, the time of the second coming and the 7-year judgment, which is the time of the lake of
Fire.
Lake of fire. Okay, now Daniel 5 and 6 are a further breakdown of Daniel chapter 4. Because remember, Daniel 5 with the story of Belshazzar, that was a type of which period of time? Remember with the Euphrates drying up?
The end.
The very end, right? We compare this with Revelation 16, the 6th last plague. The river Euphrates being dried up, and the kings of the north and the east being the kings of the east away, the kings of the east being prepared. It represented the second coming of Jesus Christ. Daniel chapter 5. Daniel 5. Okay, so Daniel 5, again, is the depiction of the second coming, the cutting of the tree, where the king of Babylon is dethroned. And then Daniel chapter 6. Gives us an explanation of the central focus of Daniel 4, which is that 7-year period of judgment. When judgment against the king of Babylon is finally executed, that lake of fire. And really, you look at Daniel chapter 6, which was a parallel of the plan of redemption of what Jesus was going to do, and coming to die for fallen man, for you and I, in order to redeem us. Daniel 6 really gives us the cause of Daniel 4, really, of all of these events taking place. So if you want to understand and kind of work your way from 6 to 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 and to 1. But look, because Jesus Christ came to this earth to live and to die because of the Father and the Son's love. Because of this, he is now able to return again, produce for himself a people, establish a kingdom for himself, cut Satan short of his goal. At that same time, this will enable the final complete destruction of Lucifer, of sin and sinner, in order that this universe may once again be restored to peacefulness and righteousness. And in light of this, Satan knows that this is going to take place. So what he tries to do is he will try to get his people to fail and to be condemned and killed by restricting freedom of conscience, by joining church and state. He will do this at a time when he is trying to set up that final kingdom of righteousness. And God is now giving us a warning that it's now time to get ready, and especially when it comes to the areas of spiritual and physical appetites. What God says and what man says. Does this kind of make sense?
Yeah, say he reads the Bible.
Yes, he does.
So he read all this.
Mm-hmm.
He knows what's going to happen. He knows he's going to lose.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how many times he reads it, it still says the same thing.
Right.
And my question is, why does he cry?
Why does he cry?
Why is he following? Why is he going to follow?
Optimist. No, because one soul that he gets away from God,
5 minutes less
He
he has
wins.
to burn.
he knows that pains him. But he's just going to keep
I
banging.
think
Yeah, but if he,
I think he's in a corner.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I always think. Satan's in the corner, and
yeah, like a mouse.
yeah, and he's got to go to he's got to follow what's going to happen. It's like there's no way out for him.
He cannot give up.
Yeah, he can't give up, but he can't get out either.
He could have gotten out before.
Yeah, he could have, but it's too late now. He's locked
Yeah, it's
into the
too late.
events.
Yep.
So that's how I think of it. I can't
So
understand
his
it.
question is, how come he doesn't give up?
Taking him prisoner.
Because he don't. Because he's going to have an end anyway. I guess he's got to finish out the time.
That pride, that
Pride.
Yeah, but pride, you know, pride do for
Never take me alive, copper kind of thing. You know. So
Well, I
he's-
guess I was trying to think of an analogy for this, but I can't really come up with one for the principle you're talking about. The way I see it is this. You know, think about that. A number of people on the top of a building, right? A very tall building. Let's say 100 stories tall, right? A skyscraper. There's a bunch of people up there, right? And imagine that one of the people, let's say that there is no barriers or anything like that. It's just a flat roof on top of the skyscraper. So you can literally just walk off and fall. Imagine if among this big group of people, one person all of a sudden trips and begins to fall over the ledge. And right next to them, they see a rope that they could grab. But they understand now that, well, look, if I fall, there's two people that are hanging onto this rope right near the very edge of the skyscraper itself. So look, at this point, I either fall and pull them down with myself and all three of us will die, or I just let myself go and that's it.
That's what's right.
Right, and to me, it's kind of like Satan, him being the evil one, that, look, I either have a choice of just letting go of the rope and just, ending myself because I know I'm going to fall and die anyways, or there's my buddy John, there's his son Eric and Daniel. You know what I can do? I can grab this rope and take those two of his sons with me just because I don't like him.
He wants to do that.
Right, and that's kind of how I see Satan, that while he knows that his exit is sure, he's going to try to pull as many people down with that rope as he can, because he knows it's going to hurt the person who was once his best friend. It's going to hurt him in his heart, which is Jesus Christ and the Father. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds you of in the news when these people kill I don't know how many people and then turn the gun on themselves.
Right? Yeah, it's...
Yeah,
No, they don't
that's
think to
coward.
turn the gun on themselves and leave the other people.
Mhm.
They want to first get their...
Right, and it hurts so many people, and it's not just the immediate family, the whole family's affected. I mean, we've all been through situations like that. Plus, I think also that sin must be sin in of itself, because we don't really understand the true nature of it, I don't think. And I don't think it's possible, and I don't know that we should want to anyways. But I think sin is just so intricately complex and mysterious that I think just having that sin embodied just in its purity, and Satan himself, even though he may see, thus say the Lord, as it's been happening for 6,000 years, but just because of that intricacy of sin, I think it's just the nature of sin that, look, at that point where you are at the point of Satan, it just doesn't matter what God says. You know what's going to happen, but you still have this self-deception that I can thwart this plan of God, which to me, can't really comprehend it. Really can't.
Because you look at it, when Satan still had a chance, he went all the way down to the wire and blew his chance.
He gambled and lost.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah, but remember who's his pawns? People.
Mm-hmm.
You are his pawn.
We'll talk now.
Yeah.
Okay, so is this kind of making sense?
Yeah.
Leading from effect to cause backwards, we get a nice delineation of what's taking place. Really, what these chapters do, from 1 through 6, is they give you, in general fashion, the entire battle between good and evil. All of prophecy from beginning to finish. It's like the frame, the construct, and type and antitype in Daniel 1 through 6. And then Daniel 7 through 12 and Revelation 1 through 22 are really just an exposition of Daniel's 1 through 6. That's really all it is. Just in very much more clear and defined language. But to me, it's beautiful once you see it that way. It creates this kind of a network, a web. It makes the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation really click together as never before. Will, you look like you're about to say something.
No, fill in.
Okay. Does this kind of make sense?
Mm-hmm.
If not, then try to go back at your own free time and see how these things line up. You'll see some beautiful things in there. Okay. So now that we're here, let's go back to Daniel chapter 7. Let's break this down and see how far we can get to tonight with Daniel 7. Sorry, Rosemary.
Shouldn't have my feet out there.
No, it's okay. Okay, Daniel 7. Can someone read for us the first 3 verses, please?
In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, behold, the 4 winds of the heaven strode upon the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another.
Okay. Okay, so tell me a little bit about the dream. What is taking place in the dream itself? What is Daniel beholding?
First one was like a lion.
Okay, so he has a dream.
Now what does that represent? Because what's his name? The last ruler of Iran.
Saddam Hussein?
Saddam Hussein. He was proud of him. I guess he was like.
Well, that's a symbol of Babylon, ain't it? Right?
Because he was gonna he tried to fight to the end. Well, he didn't fight to the end, but he hung around to the end.
He cowered to the
Yeah,
end.
well, he made the mistake of trying to rebuild something, right?
Babylon.
Yeah, he tried to rebuild Babylon, and we didn't really take a look at those prophecies yet, but what did God say about Babylon?
Would never be rebuilt.
That's what took out Alexander.
Something? The United States military had to read the Bible to figure out what was going on with the whole thing.
Well, perhaps they misapplied prophecy in some parts, I think, but...
Oh yeah, well, you don't just say it's perfect war, but yeah, they had to read through the Bible and say, look, we win.
Yeah, well, people do that. I've seen that people, when it comes to the Middle East, people take certain prophecies and apply them where they shouldn't be applied. But so in Daniel 7, how many entities do we see? 4, right? 4 beasts. Now, when is this taking place, anyways? When is Daniel having this vision?
First year of Belshazzar.
First year of Belshazzar. Okay, so tell me, when is this taking place?
You mean the year?
Yes, I want the actual year. Belshazzar came to be a ruling man on the throne when? We covered this in Daniel chapter 5.
50, I forget, yeah.
Remember, in 556, it was his father Nabonidus that came to the throne. And 3 years later, what did Nabonidus do?
Gave up his throne.
Well, in a matter of speaking, he
went to a
built.
different region.
Yeah. Nabonidus went to have a throne, in a matter of speaking, in a different place that Oasis obtained. Right, so he went there to devote himself to the study of the moon god Sin, the Assyrian moon god, and he left Belshazzar in charge of Babylon. And that was 553 BC. And the ancient rulers did not count the year of their ascendancy as the first ruling year, which tells you that the first year of Belshazzar would be which year? 552.
2.
Right, counting the other one.
Oh, okay.
So what did you say it was, 515?
552 BC. This is 552. We're talking about 13 years before Babylon still falls. So this is 13 years before the fall of Babylon. Okay. So what is the first thing that he sees? Great Sea. What about the Great Sea?
The sea, that means people, right?
Well, we'll have to figure out, what the sea means, and you're right. It means the peoples and the multitudes, tongues, etc. But what about the 4 winds? What about the sea? There's a connection between the two. Something's happening between the two, right? The 4 winds?
The winds
We're
stirring up the sea?
yeah.
Okay, so what does that mean?
People are getting
Trouble?
uneasy, unrest. or
Well,
something.
winds is war in the Bible.
Right.
There had to be turmoil.
Right. Let's look up a couple verses, actually. Let's go to Jeremiah chapter 25.
Hmm. 25? You said?
All right, Jeremiah 25 and verses 31 through 33. And this is actually, the context is the second coming of Jesus Christ.
Behold, I am against the prophets, saith the Lord. That ye there come and said, he saith, behold, I am against them that prophecy false dreams, saith the Lord. And do tell them, and cause my people to err by their lies, and by their lightness. Yeah, I sent them not, nor commanded them. Therefore they shall not profit this people at all, saith the Lord. And what?
To verse 33.
And when this people, or the prophet, or the priest, shall ask thee, saying, what is the burden of the Lord? Thou shalt then say unto them, what burden? I will even forsake you, saith the Lord.
Okay, so the winds are connected to what series of events right there in Jeremiah 25? When God is speaking of his whirlwind coming out of the north, it signifies what?
Out of heaven.
Right, out of heaven. But the whirlwind itself, what does it connotate? Because the whirlwind is not going to take place in heaven,
Whirlwind is
but
like
it's
brings strife, no?
right.
Confusion?
Right, a whirlwind out there was really just commotion. It's strife. Let's look up Jeremiah 49, 36 through 37. Because when Jesus comes back, when he returns with the whirlwind of the north, it's really this unconquerable force, this vengeance that the Lord is returning with. Jeremiah 49, 36 through 37.
And upon evil will I bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven, and will scatter them toward all those winds. And there shall be no nation whither the outcast of Elam shall not come. For I will cause Elam to be dismayed before their enemies, and before them that seek their life. And I will bring evil upon them, even my fierce anger, saith the Lord, and I will send the sword after them, till I have consumed them.
So same idea. Notice there how there is a mention of the four.
Yeah, who's the
Four ones, right? Hold that thought until Daniel 11. Sorry, we can't. Sorry. You always ask those questions where I wish we could go into it, but it's just...
I don't think I was holding you back.
And can someone look up for us Jeremiah chapter 4? And I believe it will be verse 13 or so. Jeremiah chapter 4. Some general verses regarding...
Behold, he shall come up as clouds, and his chariot shall be as a whirlwind. His horses are swifter than eagles. Woe unto us, for we are spoiled. 14 too? No.
Yeah, you can actually read 12 as well.
12.
Yeah, 11 and 12. Why don't you do 11 and 12?
Okay. At that time it shall be said to this people and to Jerusalem, a dry wind of the high places in the wilderness towards the daughter of my people, not to fan nor to cleanse. Even a full wind from those places shall come unto me. Now also I will give sentence against them. Behold, he shall come up as clouds, and his chariot shall be as a whirlwind. His horses are swifter than eagles. Woe unto us, for we are spoiled.
Yeah. So, figuratively, yes, Willie?
And on the end, what's that say? Upon the...
Where? Oh, upon the great sea. So just in that verses in Jeremiah chapter 4, symbolically speaking, what does the wind represent?
Trouble.
Right, trouble, conflict, strife, destruction, and death.
There's always trouble.
Yeah, there's we mentioned how there will be some special kinds of trouble, especially at the end of time, which is why this idea of four, when we read Jeremiah 49, because this idea of the four winds of strife as opposed to 5 or 3 or 2 also has a connotation, right? Can someone look up for us Matthew 24:31? Matthew 24:31.
And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other.
Now the four winds in that instance simply means the four corners of the earth. So when we're speaking in Daniel 7 of the four winds as being in agitation, we're speaking of war, conflict, and strife and destruction in the majority of the world. The entire world is involved in this conflict, strife, and destruction. Does that kind of make sense? More or less? And where are the four winds?
At what point in time?
In the beginning of Daniel 7.
Upon the waters of the sea.
Okay, what does the sea represent?
People. Lots of people.
Multitudes.
Right, peoples, nations, right, multitudes. Use the biblical term of kindreds. Let's look up some verses. Isaiah 57:20. And someone could grab that one. We will also have Isaiah chapter 17, verses 12 and 13. And also Revelation 17:15. Revelation 17:15 seems to be the icing on the cake.
I got it, Isaiah.
Isaiah 57?
Yeah. But the wicked are like the troubled sea when it cannot rest. Waters cast up mire and dirt.
Can you read it one more time?
But the wicked are like the troubled sea, when it cannot rest, whose waters cast up mire and dirt. Can't see clear.
So yeah, so the wicked are like the big sea. Who's got Isaiah 17, 12, and 13?
Woe to the multitude of many people which make a noise like the noise of the seas, and to the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. The nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them, and they shall flee far off, and shall be chased as the chaff of the mountains before the wind, and like a rolling thing before the whirlwind.
Okay, so same principle. And Revelation 17, 15.
And he said unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the war sitteth, are peoples, multitudes, and nations, and tongues.
Amen. Okay, so clearly, biblically, in prophetic symbolism, excuse me, in Bible prophecy, waters, whether it's a river, and sometimes a river or lake may connotate different things, but generally, waters, whether it's a lake or a stream or an ocean, represents people. Just people in general, the people of the earth, generally speaking, the nations. Okay, so what does it mean that the four winds are in agitation, are in conflict and strive upon the great sea? Because as they are in agitation upon the great sea, what does Daniel begin to take place? What does Daniel see, rather?
The beasts.
Right, and he sees the first beast, then he sees the second beast, right? Now, is there any connotation or any indication that the winds of strife are no longer in agitation upon the sea when the second beast comes on the scene? There is none, right? Which kind of implies the idea that the sea is in agitation throughout each one of these beasts coming up out of the sea, right? Which means that each one of them comes up as a result of?
War strife.
As a result of warfare, right? Because the very fact that there are four winds tells us that much of the known world is involved in conflict and warfare. And out of the warfare, arises a succession of how many kingdoms? 4. All right, of 4 nations, which are the 4 beasts. From verses 1, 2, and 3, is there anything else that we can gather about these beasts?
Diverse.
What does that mean, diverse?
Different.
All right, so each one is different from the others. Now we're going to compare these 2 chapters a little bit later, Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. We've already seen a succession of kingdoms, right? Do you remember which chapter that was in? All right, Daniel 2. All right, with the big statue, the metal man, head of gold, silver, brass, iron and clay at the feet. When we looked at that, that was really a succession of kingdoms in Daniel 2, but what else did it represent on a deeper level?
The march of history, right?
The march of history and who has been trying to use history for his own benefit. Right, so it was a prophecy about how each kingdom represented a system that Satan was trying to use in order to establish a kingdom for himself, a kingdom of sin and idolatry. So if you really want to break this down, following with the mentality of Daniel 2, each represents Satan's attempt at establishing.
And it's kind of like a retreat in a way.
Go on.
Well, it gets progressively weaker. You know, like each inferior kingdom comes along.
Yeah, the tactics change.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. Because as we go down with the animals get
Fierce, more fierce.
But it's kind of like with the gold, with the metals in Daniel chapter 2. The metal
It's
It
hard.
was pure and then it became,
right. It gets inferior, but the closer you get to the bottom, the harder it becomes, right? And it's more.
Stronger it gets. Well, that's what happened with Rome.
Exactly. And there's a mention of this in here,
The
right?
dragon is stronger than a lion. You take a Komodo dragon and kill a lion with no problem.
Especially when it has iron teeth, right? As we see in the prophecy.
Yeah, and as you go through these different kingdoms, you're getting more likely to take over the world. The kingdom is encompassing more and more technologies, to take over the world.
Right. Which I guess if you tie it in with the carnal human nature, which only wants more and more and more. Yeah. If you're an empire, for example, Babylon, when by the time you conquer the world, well, you want another world to conquer. The sinfulness of our hearts is insatiable. Okay, so does this make sense? 4 beasts? Okay. Alright, let's break this down. Number 1. What's the first kingdom? Can someone read for us Daniel 7 and verse 4?
The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it.
Okay. So we have the first of the 4 beasts, but first and foremost, what is a beast represent in Bible prophecy?
The kingdom or political
Okay,
power.
how do we know that? How do we know that?
you taught us
You showed us somewhere in the Bible, I don't remember where.
So the 4 beasts. A beast represents, you're right, beast equals a kingdom or a power. Staying in this chapter, how do we know that a beast is a kingdom or a power?
In this chapter,
Mm-hmm.
Seven verse.
There's 2 verses in this chapter.
17.
Okay, can you read 17 for us, please, Anita?
These great beasts which are 4 kings which shall arise out of the earth.
Okay, so these great beasts, which are 4 kings that shall arise out of the earth, and there's one more verse.
Is it a lower number or a higher number?
I don't know if I'm going to go ahead with that.
23, that he said, thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth.
Mm-hmm. Correct. So Daniel 7, 17, and 23 tell us that in Bible prophecy, a beast represents a kingdom or a power. And we are told that each one of these beasts rise on the scene as a result of war and conflict.
There's something else that represents a kingdom, please. A horn.
The horn. Right, I was going to bring this out a little bit later. So I'll just write it down for now. Right, there's before we have the horns, there's also a
horn.
A little horn.
there are horns, and there are
A little
also
horn.
there's a little horn, right? But there are also heads, and we'll see that in the 3rd beast, right?
Yeah.
There are heads and there are horns, and just in short, yeah, we'll.
Dean, repeat what you just said about they will arise. What was your term you said there?
That they will arise on the scene as a result of war and conflict.
They arise as a result of God's people in apostasy. Go back to why were they enthroned in Babylon, became power, and took Israel captive. Why?
Because they did not.
Israel.
Now you know, and you can move it on up, and you'll find in times it corresponds with events with God's people.
Well, that's
Allows
interesting.
These world kingdoms that come up to power when they come to power.
Well, that's an interesting thing. I guess I'll have to think about it a little bit. You know, each time a kingdom comes up, does it correspond to a particular event of apostasy when it comes to God's people? So it's an interesting thought. I'm definitely going to dig into that. But really quick, the head and the horns, what do they represent?
Kingdom. Power.
King.
Right, it's either represents another kingdom or a subdivision.
What's a subdivision?
A part of. Like, let's say, for example, you have a kingdom. That kingdom itself is split up into 3 different parts. That can be represented as a beast with a head and 3 horns, or a beast with 3 heads. It's kind of, we'll mention that a little bit later in prophecy. It's not too important here. With the head and the horn, there are kingdoms or subdivisions of a kingdom or a power. Okay, so number 1. What is the first beast? Rachel, can you read that for us, please?
The first is like a lion.
Verse 4.
The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings therefore were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it.
Okay, so what can you guys tell me about the first beast?
Pretty interesting.
It's a pretty interesting beast, right?
Why would it have eagle's wings? That's the part.
Okay.
And then they were plucked off.
And it crashed.
So there's a lion. It's a little bit more than a lion, right?
And it's an eagle.
First of all, a lion, if we're talking about prophecy, why would God use a symbol of a lion in this instance?
Strength.
Right, the lion is
It's
the
almost
beast. Right, it's the mightiest of mammals. Or the king.
Yep, the smallest pound per pound.
Okay. So how would that translate over to the succession of kingdoms?
Power.
What about power? About this power?
The kingdom has greatest power there is.
Greatest power compared to what?
Everybody.
Right, because out of these animals right over here, for the most part, a lion is considered what in relation to a leopard?
More powerful.
More powerful. What about the bear?
Less
Less.
powerful.
Right, and the dragon beast, well, who knows what that looked like, really. Right, but at least for the first 3, it kind of implies the idea that, look, this was the greatest, the most powerful, the mightiest of all the kingdoms in this successive list. Lion, the mightiest mammal.
this one.
Mammals. Right.
What's this right here?
It's a really butchered word, which is supposed to say king.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that looked like a couple different words.
I thought it was some kind of chemical.
Mightiest of mammals, so I will say that it is the greatest of the 4 kingdoms depicted.
It's probably more, we want to say stealth or, watch a cat hunt versus watch a bear hunt. Versus
I can
leopard.
demonstrate that if you want.
They're very subtle, sneaky, thorough, search out their prey, and then, a bear just
Yeah, and a lion's attack is oftentimes more unsuspecting, right?
Mhm.
Especially with the tall grass.
I don't know if I would agree that Babylon was the most powerful. I think it was the richest. But as far as power went, I don't think it was the most powerful.
Well, there you go. A lion definitely is not
It's
as strong as a bear.
The bear has got a terrible head.
A lion
is
will take a bear.
bear.
That's
Yeah, that's why I used the word greatest over here, because I was like, wait, the mightiest thing, it doesn't really 100% play out.
Right, it's the figure in the.
Well, there are different kinds of bears
Even that
too.
Komodo
That's
dragon.
true. It's the grizzly
I
bear.
said
Black bear.
record.
Komodo
What's
dragon
that
up there
big
starting lying.
I don't think it's the grizzly bear. There's
Record for
another
lion
bigger
kills. You
one.
ever hear about that story?
Yeah.
2 lions
I don't know what it
killed
is.
over 200 people
But I saw it in
Night by night.
I saw it in
in a place in Africa. The 2 lions killed over 200 people. It was hard for those hunters to get those lions. There was a whole story about it. 2 man-eating lions killed over 200 people in history. They have an account of 2 lions in a team killing over 200 people in a summer.
I think that's when they made that movie off of that.
Yeah, it was about a railroad
The ghost in-
line.
Yeah, The Ghost in the Darkness. Well, that's something scary to find there. But, yeah, it's what we're studying in Revelation, right? The beasts of the earth coming upon the earth. Okay, so lion. I wrote down that is the most magnificent of the mammals. It's the king of the mammals, which tells you that this is to be the greatest king of the kingdoms listed. It's supposed to have the most splendor, wealth, and magnificence to it. Rachel, what else does it have?
Wings like an eagle. Wings of an eagle.
All right, so eagles, wings.
And they were plucked.
Okay. What would a wing signify? I'm talking about
Swift.
Right, it's used by a bird. So here we have a bit of a conflict, because this is apparently a lion, right?
With the bird's wings.
With the bird's wings.
Seems like it ate the bird and then it got the wings of the, I don't know.
I'll go with that.
So it conquers swiftly. Conquered the world very fast, and it started under Nabopolassar and then Nebuchadnezzar. But what does a bird do? When it starts off where? Where does a bird start off?
As a baby.
As a baby, it starts off on the ground, or at least on a nest in a tree, right? But there's some sort of a support. So then,
Now like a
so the bird starts on the ground, right? And then it uses its wings to
Fly.
fly.
Birds-
When you fly, what do you do objectively? You lift yourself from being... You gain altitude, right? So you use wings to lift yourself up. Okay, what happened with the kingdom? Because long story short, what does the lion represent at this point?
Pride, pack.
It represents Babylon, the kingdom of Babylon. It's the first kingdom, just as in Daniel 2, the head of gold represented Babylon. So the greatest of the animals also represents the Babylonian kingdom. Let's write this down over here. So this is technically called the Neo-Babylonian Empire.
Yeah, it was their symbol, wasn't it?
Sorry?
Wasn't that one of
Yes.
Babylon's symbols on their gates and stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
I know it was
Eagles'
Assyrian.
wings.
It was
Lions with
Assyrian.
wings.
anytime you watch the war.
Yeah. So,
You had a picture of all.
Actually, I was doing a little bit of research, and this symbol of a lion with eagle's wings, it all dates all the way back pretty much to the original Tower of Babel, to the original Babylon, with Semiramis and Nimrod. And apparently this lion with eagle's wings was used by the Babylonians for hundreds of years, all the way up until we get to this point in time. But what I found interesting is, you know how this whole system of paganism that was set up, right, with the sun god, with Semiramis, and that really represented Lucifer, and how then it was taken over by the Egyptians. How Semiramis was then represented as the Ishtar, right? And in one of the Assyrian, I guess one of the Assyrian nations or tribes or whatever you want to call it, there was a depiction of Ishtar, of this goddess Ishtar under a different name, riding on this two-winged lion, is really having control over it. And it was Ishtar, which we know is a representation of Lucifer himself in the Egyptian Egyptology. Which to me is really interesting, how we know it's Satan that is trying to steer these nations left and right to fulfill his purpose, and how Ishtar, this goddess, is a representation of Lucifer in occultism and paganism. And then you kind of jump forward to Revelation 17, where you remember there is a woman that is riding a beast, steering the nations in governments of the world as to how she would want them to act. So I kind of found it interesting that this has been a symbol, for hundreds of years before even the time of Daniel. Rachel?
They talk in the movie Esther. They talk about Ishtar, the goddess of love, isn't it?
That's who it is, but she's not the goddess of love, unfortunately.
Ishtar
Yeah.
indicate Easter.
Yeah, the Ishtar Gate. Who had that? Assyria had the Ishtar Gate, right? They call it.
It was in Babylon.
Babylon? Ishtar Gate.
So it conquers swiftly, and again, this idea of using the wings to lift yourself up. Again, what did Babylon do as time went on? It lifted itself up. Against who? I mean, apply this spiritually. This idea of a lion lifts itself up with the two wings that it has.
Against God. People.
Right, it lifts itself up against God. It established itself as a system of sin and idolatry. And if you think about, for example, Daniel, just write down Daniel chapter 3. Did Nebuchadnezzar lift himself up against God with his whole kingdom? Yes, he did. How did he do that?
Made the all gold image.
Right. Look, you're the God of heaven. I just acknowledge this. I see what your dream says about these kingdoms, but no, I'm going to do it my way, and that the gold is going to exist forever, for all eternity. And so he sets himself up against God in Daniel chapter 3. Do we see the same thing in Daniel 4? Daniel 4 and verse 30. Well, let me just quote it for you. Then the king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? And this was after everything that the Lord was trying to do for him. So clearly, throughout the history of ancient Babylon, we see a record of continuously rebelling and lifting itself up against the God of heaven. Thus the significance of the eagle's wings. Also, to kind of dig this a little bit deeper, a lion is what kind of an animal?
Carnivore, yeah.
It's a carnivore, but as we mentioned before, its realm of existence and might is where? It's down on the earth, right? So, but it has what kind of wings? Eagle's wings. Does this seem kind of like a little bit of a contradiction or a little bit of a paradox, right? Because the lion is not supposed to have eagle's wings. But this line basically says, I know that I'm a land animal, however, I am good enough to be able to go and fly up into the air. You follow me? So this system, in a matter of speaking, and again, try to translate this symbolically, this system aspires.
Hard way to go.
What does it aspire for?
Godhood or something, like heavenly.
Aspires, or at least it aspires for a position. Which what?
Not supposed to have.
Yeah, which it is not supposed to have.
And it can't happen either because of eagle's wings were made to lift a bird up that weighs about 14 pounds. There's no way it's getting a 500-pound animal.
That's right. That's right. How did Babylon do this?
Imagination.
Right, that imagination went on a wrong turn. Let's stay in Daniel chapter 3. How did Babylon aspire for a position which it did not supposed to have? In Daniel 3.
Yeah, well, this is part of Daniel 3, though, right?
In Daniel 2, yes, that's the dream. Daniel 3 is the actual setting up of the image and the plains of Dura. So how did Babylon aspire for a position which it wasn't supposed to have in Daniel 3? We kind of already mentioned it, just different
Well, they
words.
set up the golden statue. And they made it all of gold, and then he wanted everybody to worship it.
Right.
Which,
So the position of Babylon in Daniel 2 and 3 in relation to the image was just at the very top, the head. Your position in history is this. You're going to fulfill this part, and that's it. But there is, they tried to aspire for a position in the flow of prophecy, in the flow of God's prophetic chart, a position which He did not intend for them to have. They said, we're going to be all of gold. We're going to go on through the end of time. God says no. They say, well, we're going to do it anyways. And we kind of mentioned that. Remember back in Daniel chapter 2 with Hitler, with the statue of Daniel and Matt.
Yeah.
Remember that? We were mentioning how he was changing the head and whatnot. Same idea. The system aspires for a position which it's not supposed to have. We saw the same thing in Daniel chapter 5, for example, right? The number has been numbered. But look, you set yourself up as this God-man who thinks himself as the number of days for the people, the judge of the world. Well, look, it's your time for yourself to be judged at this point.
Yeah, we still have that golden image, that the Oscar ceremony. The Oscar.
Yeah, yeah. It's,
Reminds me of that.
maybe we'll mention that sometime. Now, the actual statue of the Oscars, it's an Egyptian god, the Egyptian god named Ptah or something like that. It's like Ptah.
PTA.
Yeah, I forget exactly how you say it. And it was like the god of drama and plays and things like that.
That's how it was.
Maybe it's Ptah. I don't know.
Ptah, yeah, it's the Egyptian god Ptah.
The Oscar.
Well, you know, when you're just talking about the woman riding the beast, and like, I think it's in Brussels or a couple places in Europe where they have that Europa, where that Europa is supposed to be, and it gives me the creeps every time I see it. You know what I mean? Because it just seems, I don't know if you, because you know a lot about symbology, but it always gives me the creeps when I see that woman riding the beast. But it looks like a bull. It reminds me of a Wall Street bull, though. You know, that
You're talking about the statue right outside of the Parliament building, right?
or the UN building, I think it is.
Is that London?
No, in Brussels.
Brussels? Belgium?
I don't think it's the Hague.
Belgium.
I think that Brussels. It's where the UN is. It's the UN building, and they've got that woman Europa. Riding
Yeah, it's outside of the United European Union office in Brussels. I'll have to
Comes up with putting
make
stuff
up a good
like
one.
that
This
there.
is the one I don't know if you can see it. It's the one you're talking about, right,
Yeah,
Kim?
it is. That's the one.
That's scary looking.
Yeah.
It is creepy.
Ugh.
Guess they know who they're in league with.
So, anyways, ancient Babylon. It's the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and do we remember what was its time of rule? Mm-hmm.
605 to
All right, 605. We covered this the last 2 weeks.
Wait, it goes down?
605 until
5:30 or something like that?
close 539.
39.
605 to 539 BC. And there's something else about this beast that we didn't mention. It is a lion that has eagle's wings.
And the feathers are popped off.
And something else is given.
It's the heart of a man.
Okay, so a man's heart is given
To it.
to it. Okay, what does that mean?
That means
The very fact that its wings were plucked tells you that, right, meaning if it was going to be grounded, it's going to be, what's another word for it? Spiritually speaking. If you're lifting yourself up with these spiritual wings, yes, I'm a big bird, I can fly really high.
Cut you down, I'm going to humble you.
Right, that's the good word, that it would be humble. It will be humbled and that it will lose its... What would it lose?
Well,
Its power, yeah, its power and dominion.
yay!
Not destroyed though.
Well, actually, we read in Daniel chapter 7, verse 12. Daniel 7 and verse 12.
That's right, they're taken away.
Yeah, as concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion
That's
taken
right,
away,
there's
and their
the
lives
12.
were prolonged for a
Okay.
season and a time.
Oh, there's their 12. All right.
Which means that eventually each one of these beasts, what happens to them?
They die.
They cease to exist, right. So a man's heart is given to it, meaning that it will be humble, lose its power and dominion, and there were basically two main ways as to how this happened.
Oh, there they are.
What are you looking at? What are you pointing to?
The beast, like the horns, the lion, and Babylon with the head of gold.
Okay, so once we go through them, there's a visual aid over there. You guys want to check it out after the study when we're done?
Wait, is it the lion with the?
It's the lion with the wings.
Okay, and it doesn't have the 3 wings and the 3 heads, right?
No.
That's that's the wrong one.
Okay, so everyone, please, if you get a chance, check out the little visual timeline that Rachel was pointing to.
What's the significance of him having to stand up on 2 feet?
What do you guys think? What's the significance of him having the wings plucked and being stood up onto 2 feet? Because I see it as one of 2 things, really. I think first and foremost, people mention that this is a reference to who?
Satan. No?
I guess you could see it that way, but and most of the time when it comes to even within our church, they say that this is a reference to Nebuchadnezzar. How Nebuchadnezzar lifted himself up, Daniel 4:30, this is the kingdom that I have built for the honor of my majesty by my hands, all of that. So some say that this is a reference to Nebuchadnezzar's change of heart. That at first Nebuchadnezzar, and especially with time, became more and more in love with himself, with self-gratification and glorification. So he so exalted himself to the point where God plucked off those wings, humbled him, and as a result, this ferocity of a lion type of beast disappeared. God gives him a tender, loving heart. That's what some say it is. Is really just more of a literal way of looking at it. That it's
Well, yeah, when Nebuchadnezzar was in that field for 7 years, he did have his hair like feathers, right? His hair was like feathers.
right.
So I guess it does make sense.
When it comes to Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see it either way. Personally, I don't see it. I don't think it's consequential if you believe either way. On the other hand, the ferocity, the power, the bite, and the strength, I would say, of this power would wane with time. And this idea of a man's heart being given to it, I like to go back to the idea of Richard the Lionhearted, that famous king in England. For him to be lion-hearted meant that he was
Very strong.
right, brave and very bold and courageous.
He never spoke English.
He never spoke what?
English. He only knew French.
I don't even know that.
The French language was the court king language at that time. I found out. I was reading a history of it, and I said, "Well, they only spoke French."
Yeah, that's kind
People could never understand their king. It was like it was really weird.
interesting. Well, in the case of Babylon, and this is the way I literally just picture it. Imagine if you have a lion. It's known for its ferocity, for its anger, its power, its strength, its might. to give that lion the heart of man, to me, is really just a symbolic of taking away of that beastly, that animal, carnal nature, is humbling.
The flag of Scotland has that symbol on it. Not the official flag, but
What does it have on there?
None of you sing the song.
it's usually in yellow and red.
Yeah.
I have one at home, but I can't.
Sort of standing up.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's on its hind paws.
Oh, you're talking about the lion.
yeah. There it is, right there.
Okay.
I think, like the second one in.
Well, the Scots and the English have lions.
Yeah, but it is upright on its feet.
Or the
Is that
first one. I guess the first one.
Right here.
Like it.
Yeah, it does kind of make you think of Daniel 7 right here. And if you get a chance to just go online, you can just type in the Scottish crest, Scottish red crest, and it's a picture of this red dragon up on its hind feet.
Oh, red dragon?
Mm-hmm. It's this red dragon lion type of creature. Can't really tell 100% some of these drawings. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. It makes you think of this. Yeah, that's kind of how I see it. That over time, because of the apostasy, because of the kind of idolatrous system that it was, it simply wouldn't work. And so as a result, the power begins to wane. By the time we get to 539 BC, the power is no more. Does anyone else have any thoughts on the idea of the man's heart being given to it? Wings plucked?
Well, when we go back to Nebuchadnezzar and it says, made to stand upon the feet as a man, because he had to crawl on his hands and knees for those 4 years. Right?
Also, if you receive a man's heart, your time is limited.
It's a good.
Your time runs out if you have a human heart. You're only going to live so long.
It's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, I like that. So
But
lion.
a man's heart can be saved. A beast's heart is only, what do you say, that temporal? It cannot gain salvation.
Well, I guess that's a really nice thought, because that gives a little bit more credence to this idea of Nebuchadnezzar being pointed to here. Interesting. Yeah, the animal's heart cannot be saved. Okay, we're good with the lion? Okay, can someone read forth the next verse in Daniel? Daniel chapter 7 and verse 5.
And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh.
Okay. Now we already saw this in Daniel 5 and Daniel chapter 6, when Babylon, when the lion was conquered. Who came on the scene? What was the next worldly power? Was the Medo-Persian Empire. Just make sure I spell this right. Technically called the Achaemenid Empire. Where I think I spelled that wrong. Yes, I did.
What do you call it?
It's Achaemenid.
How do you pronounce it?
It's the Achaemenid.
Achaemenid.
Achaemenid Empire. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but.
Achaemenid.
What was the years of rule?
39.
Right, 539 to. Eventually, you're going to have these down. Don't worry. 539 to 331 BC. Medo-Persian Empire.
What is that? C-H-A-R-M?
Achaemenid. It goes from the M to the E here. The Achaemenid. It's just the technical term for it. That's what you may have to look up on the internet.
Greek probably, right?
Just sorry?
A Greek word?
Yeah, it's just I forget exactly what it's a reference to, but it's just that portion of the Medo-Persian rulers for really this period of time, because there were many rulers before this and after, but not really of that much significance. Okay, so what do we know about the bear?
It was raised up on one side.
Okay, so one side is raised.
The 3 ribs it had in its mouth for 2 kingdoms.
Okay, so 3 ribs. Now, okay, the very fact that it was raised on one side, what did it mean? What does it mean?
Well, and 3 ribs means it already devoured something.
Are you talking about the ribs in the mouth?
Yes.
Is it?
Okay, well, let's take care of that in a minute. What about it being raised up on one side before we take care of the ribs?
What?
One strong,
side's higher.
one side stronger.
Than the other.
Right, one side is higher, and if you're looking at this again figuratively, to be higher than somebody else means
Superior.
you're superior, right?
Power.
It's kind of like sitting on your enemy after you've beat them up, you know, if you had a brother or sister when you were younger. So one side was raised. Is this true of the Medo-Persian Empire? Was there one portion of the empire more significant, stronger, more in power, authoritative than other? Right, it was which part of the empire?
No, Persia.
The Persian, right. I would just say that the Persian
He derives from
side of
Beginning?
empire was more dominant. It was the dominant power when it came to the civil authority. Maybe I'll put that in here.
Well,
Civil.
so it's about 200 years. There's a bunch of them in there. Right, a bunch of kings in there.
Sorry?
There's a lot of span of kings. Was it 200 years there? There's
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot of different kings in there.
And so that's historically accurate
Oh, yeah, civil. What's underneath?
civil authority. Medes were on the scene first. Persians came on the scene second. They became the dominant power. This is why Cyrus was called Cyrus the Persian, because he is the one that led the conquest in that. And the 3 ribs in the mouth, what did you guys say it was?
3 nations.
3 kingdoms.
Yeah, 3 kingdoms.
That were
Okay, now the very fact that these are ribs will tell you how much about the strength, the might of these powers.
They were
Tore
raised.
it up.
Right, because they're not much, a rib is not much compared to a head or an actual horn, right, that sticks out. So it tells you that these powers that were removed by the Medo-Persian Empire as it came on the scene, they weren't world powers, but they were of significance. I'll say that it conquers 3
It's a
powers.
strange vision, you know? Bear with 3 ribs in its mouth.
Okay, so it conquers 3 powers as it arrives on the scene. What were the 3 powers? You know the first one, right?
Babylon.
Babylon, in what year?
538.
No, but
Right, 539 BC. What was next?
Egypt.
Egypt. Do you remember what year? I
Yeah.
have to check this one too. 525. And there was also
Lydia.
the kingdom of Lydia, which was really where the Syrians, where Turkey is now.
Yeah,
currently.
Turkey, yeah.
And that was the year 547.
Libya.
So again, historically speaking, prophecy, is it accurate?
Yeah.
100%, always. So Medo-Persian Empire comes on the scene, Persians are more dominant, and as it comes up on the scene, we see that it has 3 ribs in its mouth, which signifies the conquest of 3 powers that stood in its way, which was Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt, all conquered successively by the Medo-Persians. And there's something else, right? For the second beast?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, thus unto it
Next
arise and devour
Sorry.
much flesh.
Yeah, it mentions that it was told to it, arise, devour much flesh. One thing that I always find of significance when looking at the conquest of the Medo-Persian is these massive armies of hundreds of thousands of people that they were able to amass, which literally just annihilated, cleared out the land completely. So again, this tells you that, look, how many people is it going to lay waste? A lot, right? So I would say that this system decimates with enormous arms. Sheer overwhelming of the enemy.
Who is they that tells him to go and destroy?
I'm sorry?
Who is the they that tells him to go out and eat much flesh? And they said thus unto it.
That's a good question. Is everyone looking at verse 5?
Yeah.
Did you hear the question?
No.
What is it? Who is they that is speaking to the beast in verse 5? And they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh.
My only guess is the other beasts, but why would they do that?
Right, since they're the ones that are being taken off the scene,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. What do you guys think? That is a good question. Huh?
Satan, but I don't know why they would use that. Instead of he.
His agents.
Yeah, that's
doesn't have the green light to go and do.
I'm sorry, who doesn't?
See,
He doesn't have,
he doesn't always have the green light to go and devour.
in the way that he wants to.
Right. Remember
Remember how we studied in Daniel 10? Because I'm going with what you guys said and Willie said. If it's speaking of they, we already mentioned that this follows the parallel of Daniel 2. How Satan, there was a depiction of how Satan's trying to depict his kingdoms and how he's trying to set it up. To me, it's kind of the same thing over here. But ultimately, it's Satan with his fallen angels, with his locusts, if you want to call them that, with his horsemen, as we're reading about in Revelation, that is ultimately behind the scenes, that is trying to steer each one of these powers. And we'll mention this in Daniel chapter 10. You remember? When Daniel was praying for his people. And when Gabriel comes, actually, in verse 13, we're talking about this behind-the-scenes conflict in Daniel 10, verse 13. And it's Gabriel speaking, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. And how, again, we'll study once we get to that chapter, how there's a conflict, a spiritual conflict. God with his angels was trying to move and bend the mind of Cyrus into one direction. Okay, look, make the decree. Let the children of Israel go free. At the same time, Satan, at that point in history, was trying to keep Cyrus from making that decree, because Satan knew that if the decree would be made, what would eventually take place? They would go back to the land of Israel, and eventually, very soon, who would come through them?
Jesus.
The Messiah. Right, so we'll study this, how in Daniel chapter 10, there's these powers behind the scenes. One is a righteous power who is God with his angels, and the other one is Satan and his angels. So Daniel 7, that's where I would go with that. When they said go to it, arise, devour much flesh, it's like Satan going, okay, now I've got you in my palm. Come on, just go. Go and conquer for me. Anyone else have a take on that? Okay. All right, so Daniel 7. Let's move on to the next one. We've got a couple minutes. See if we can squeeze in the leopard. Someone read for us Daniel 7, verse 6.
After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it.
Alexander.
Right, so now we have, first and foremost, what kind of beast is it?
The leopard.
Leopard. You guys already mentioned, who does this represent? Which empire came after Medo-Persia?
Greece.
Mm-hmm. Ancient Greece. What year?
331. 331.
All right, 331 until
It was like 300 years, right?
168.
163.
About 200.
168.
It's ancient Greece. Willie is right. The first man that gave rise to this global empire was Alexander the Great. I'll just mention this in here.
So we got it written down in my book.
Alexander the Great. Okay, what can you tell me about Alexander the Great?
He was
Died
fast,
young.
he was smart,
He was smart. He was a military genius, right?
why he lived.
While he lived. Well, I guess, yeah, anyone can be a genius while they live. Rosemary, you said that he died
Young.
young, right? How young was he? Do you guys remember?
33.
Drunk,
33. And died, unfortunately, because?
drinking, alcohol.
I think his last conquest was God, and that's what killed him when he went to Babylon.
Wasn't he the one that said that he was very disappointed there was nothing else to conquer?
That's why he went to
yeah.
Babylon. He wanted to take God on.
That's something, I'm not sure if I think I may have shared it with you guys last time, that, you know how we mentioned that God said Babylon will never be rebuilt, no matter what you do, and that's true of the historic Babylon and the one in our time too. But historically, God said, don't even try to rebuild it, because it's not going to happen down there in the Middle East. And I think last time we mentioned how it was Saddam Hussein that tried to rebuild Babylon. Shortly after he tried to do that, he was taken off the scene. And it was the same thing with Alexander the Great. Did you ever hear about that, Dave? How he actually made plans to begin the rebuilding of the literal
Yeah.
town, the
That's
city
where
of Babylon.
his capital was supposed to be.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, he was literally about to issue orders to his generals to begin the process of rebuilding it, which is why within several nights of that is when he died of alcohol poisoning.
Smith's book said he was there 2 months. About 2 months he was there in Babylon. Then he died in a 2-month period.
It's interesting nonetheless. But going along those lines, I'm going to give you guys a handout. I mean, this will be the last thing we'll read today. And I guess just grab one and pass it around. Okay. And this is from the historian Josephus's book, Antiquities of the Jews.
I've been looking for that book for years. I can never find it.
You mean in paperback?
When I go to market, flea market, I always look for it.
I can get it online too. You can get them online on all the books and everything, but
I'll find it.
yeah, it's not easy. I heard.
I'll find it. I know I'll find it.
Yeah, I just googled that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just googled Scottish crest and see what
I
came
always
up.
think I should know more about the computer, but I don't.
Well, I think it's also bad if you don't know, if you know too much. on the computer
I
side.
mean, I don't want to spend my life in front of it.
Right. Okay, so this is from book. I believe it was book 11. I don't think I put that down. It's book 11 of Antiquities of the Jews, and it's chapter 8. And we're going to look at on that page 2 that I gave out, from the arrow in the top paragraph to the arrow in the bottom paragraph. And it's speaking about Alexander the Great's conquest and what happened concerning his conquering around Jerusalem and what took place in Jerusalem. So let's break this up into 2 or maybe 3. Can someone read that second half of that top paragraph starting where it says, now Alexander, please?
When he had taken Gaza, they hastened to go to Jerusalem, and Judea, the high priest, when he had heard that the great agony under Tariff, as to knowing how he should meet in Macedonia, since the king was displeased at his foregoing disobedience. He therefore ordained that the people should take supplication and should join with him in offering sacrifice to God, whom he besought to protect that nation, and to deliver them from the perils that were coming upon them. Whereupon God warned him in a dream, which he came upon him after he had offered sacrifice, that he should take courage and adorn the city and open the gates, that the rest should appear in white garments, but that he and the priest should meet the king in the habits proper to their order, without the dread of any ill consequences, which the providence of God would prevent. Upon which, when he rose from his sleep, greatly rejoiced and declared to all the warnings he had received from God, according to which dream he acted entirely, and so waited for the coming of the king.
Okay, so
When
you
he
guys,
understood that he
hold
was
on,
not-
Rich, hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. So you guys understand what's happening here? What happened with Alexander? That Alexander was about to come to Jerusalem, and the high priest, what was his name, Jaddua, was perplexed as to how to approach them. You know, do we fight? What do we do? Do we welcome them with open arms? Lord, what do you want us to do? So he asked this of the Lord, and the Lord gave him a dream. That, look, Alexander is coming. Don't do anything. Just look, have a procession. Welcome them with open arms, dress up in your high priestly attire, and welcome them as the conquering king. Which, you know, I find it interesting that that's something we mentioned concerning the conquest of Cyrus, that some Jewish sources say that that's exactly what happened, that they came out with the scroll of Isaiah. It's kind of the same thing over here, but this is Alexander the Great that we're talking about. And also keep in mind that when Alexander was conquering, remember, he didn't just take his guys with his army. Many of the parts of the nations which he conquered, the men, the warriors from those tribes, from those groups of people, joined up many times with the conquering force. So here, and you actually see this in a little bit here, there's other parts of other nations that are here with Alexander, and they're ready to destroy Jerusalem. They're ready to go in there, sack it, steal everything that they can, plunder it completely so that they can get richer. And this is where the second part comes in. Can someone maybe I don't know.
And when he understood that he was not far from the city, he went out in procession with the priests and the multitude of the citizens. The procession was venerable, and the manner of it different from that of other nations. It reached to a place called Sapha, which name translated into Greek signifies a prospect for you, then a prospect both of Jerusalem and of the temple. And when the Phoenicians and Chaldeans that followed him that thought they should have liberty to plunder the city and torment the high priest to death, which the king's displeasure fairly promised them. The very reverse of it happened. For Alexander, when he saw the multitude at a distance in white garments, while the priest stood clothed with fine linen, and the high priest in purple and scarlet clothing with his mitre on his head, having the golden plate whereon the name of God was engraved, he approached by himself and adored that name and first saluted the high priest. The Jews also did all together with one voice salute Alexander and encompassed him about, whereupon the kings of Syria of the rest were surprised at what Alexander had done, and supposed him disordered in his mind. However, Parmenio alone went up to him and asked him how it came to pass that, when all the others adored him, he should adore the high priest of the Jews. To whom he replied, I did not adore him, but that God who has honored him with his high priesthood. For I saw this very person in a dream, in his very habit, when I was at Theos in Macedonia. So when I was considering with myself how I might obtain the dominion of Asia, exhorted me to make no delay, but boldly to pass over the seas thither, for that he would conduct my army and would give me the dominion over the Persians. Whence it is that, having seen no other in that habit, and now seeing this person in it, and remembering that vision and the exhortation which I had in my dream, I believe that I bring this army under divine conduct, and shall therewith conquer Darius and destroy the power of the Persians, and that all things will succeed according to what is in my own mind. And when he had said this to Parmenio, and given the high priest his right hand, the priest ran along by him, and he came into the city. And when he went up into the temple, he offered sacrifice to God, according to the high priest's direction, and magnificently treated both the high priest and the priest. And when the book of Daniel was showed him, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that he himself was the person intended.
Okay, and we'll stop there. But if you haven't heard that before, that's pretty fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, it's effectively what happened is Alexander the Great was thinking and pondering how am I going to do this? How am I going to conquer the world with so few men? And the Lord, literally, as his custom is, of giving dreams and visions, not just to his people, but those who are willing to accept it and be led by him. God gives him a dream, a vision. Look, don't even think about what you're going to do. Just go. Just go, because I've prepared the way before you. So to me, it's absolutely beautiful. And we see that how far Alexander conquered under the guidance of the Lord.
Yeah, but by this, he could have known about Babylon prophecy, not to be rebuilt.
Right?
And chose to act on that.
Yeah, I guess that's where he kind of stepped into that line where the other guys crossed. God said, but he wanted to do it and make it happen anyway.
He was a heavy drinker. Maybe his mind was warped at that time, and that's what he wanted to do.
Yeah, we mentioned the wine of Babylon. Right? So we'll pick this up next week. We'll pick up with the leopard, and then we'll focus on the dragon beast and the little horn next week. We're going to probably spend another 2 weeks in this chapter. So we're going to break the earthly part of that down next week of the chapter, and then the heavenly scene, the judgment scene of Daniel 7, with Jesus, with the Father, the Ancient of Days, and exactly what's taking place there. So, any comments, questions on Daniel, prophecy, what we're covering? Can we turn to Romans chapter 8 really quick to close? Just a note of encouragement. We're talking about how Satan's conquering this, conquering that. I just think it's good for us to remember that. Look, no matter what Satan may do, let's keep in mind one thing, and that's right. And if we're on his side, we're part of the victory. Romans 8, and can someone read for us verses 35 through 39? Romans 8, 35 through 39.
Who shall separate us?
Give me a minute. I know you're fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? As it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loves us. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord.
Amen. So let's keep this in mind as we're into another week. Amen. Can someone close for us, please, with a word of prayer? Anyone?
See if I can get this.
Those pockets.
Dear Lord, thank you so much for our lesson studies, and the weight of history is such a tremendous thing in this, and religion and God. Thank you so much for your Son and the Spirit that leads us and works on our hearts. Thank you to look after all the people out there that we know and we try to reach. And sometimes it's like talking to a wall, but we ask the Spirit to work a miracle sometimes with these people. I ask for blessings on the way home and protection, and thank you so much for loving us. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.